Such an important topic we're going to be talking about in this final session. We're all in this together, so we should act like it. It's a theme that you've heard consistently across all these morning conversations. And this is such an important day to have this conversation. Some of you will know today is the anniversary of Bloody Sunday in Selma, when civil rights activists were brutally attacked on a bridge on their way from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And we couldn't be more privileged to have Catherine Flowers here to talk to us a little bit about how we need to all come together. Catherine is the founding director for the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. And I thought we'd just start, Catherine, with just a few words about your own story.
Thank you. Well, my story really starts in Lowndes County, Alabama, and most of the march from Selma to Montgomery goes through Lowndes County. In addition to that, I came from activist parents. I got involved as a young person, and I'm happy that we're following the session of young people. As an older person now, I am very moved by what they do, and they give me lots of inspiration to continue to do this fight, and that's why it's so important for us to do this for the generations to come. So my work is to make sure that the generations, at least 7 generations beyond Catherine, will have a livable planet.
Thank you, Catherine. So this theme for our conversation, we're all in this together, so we need to start acting like it. Perhaps no issue is that more true than climate change. Could you tell us a little bit about how you look at this theme?
The way I look at climate change in this theme is that throughout the United States, the most vulnerable people are suffering now, and they're suffering the most. And there's a lot of frontline communities that are suffering, whether they're in Cancer Alley in Louisiana or East Palestine. And I think that as we look at climate change and environmental justice and climate justice, nobody is free of that. We're all impacted by it. And sooner or later it's coming, whether you're living in areas that are experiencing wildfires or areas experiencing drought, or those areas that, like in my community recently, I spent a lot of time, I've moved to the Huntsville area in North Alabama, and we've become the new Tornado Alley. But the weather that we're having was in December. One day it was very hot. It was in the 80s. The next day we had snow on the ground. That was in Alabama. So clearly places around the world are dealing with climate change, but in the communities where people do not have the ability to, if they're living in mobile homes, they don't have the ability to protect themselves from heat. They're all impacted. So I think that we have to collectively work on these issues now in order to get to where we need to be.
So this point that climate impacts are not an issue for somewhere else or tomorrow. They're a today issue, and they're happening everywhere. But the added point that the impacts are disproportionately falling on vulnerable communities in the United States, around the world, and we need to recognize that, take that much more into account as we think a little bit about the response to climate. And maybe that's a good segue. We are at an unprecedented moment, as most of you know, in this country in terms of climate action. We have historic legislation that's been passed in the past year on climate issues, on environmental justice issues. How do we take this forward? What do we do in response to these challenges?
Well, first of all, I'd like to commend the Biden administration for the work that has been done around climate change with the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I serve as the co-vice chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and this administration has put forth 40% of all of those funds have to go to communities that have been under-resourced and overburdened. And I think that's very significant as it relates to how we get to where we need to go. And I think that we are also having unprecedented ways in which people are working together across lines that have never worked together before to try to address these issues. I don't know whether this is the time for me to talk about something significant that happened on yesterday, but I'm very excited because there was a time that big greens like NRDC wouldn't have been working in places like Alabama or Lowndes County, Alabama. And on yesterday, we filed a complaint with EPA's Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights against the state of Alabama because of people not having access to funding for on-site sanitation, which is being impacted by climate change. A lot of those systems are not working, and they're very expensive, and homeowners can't afford to pay for them because we're getting a lot of rain when we have these rain bombs, and we're also getting rising water tables due to sea level rise. So consequently, for us to come together and file that complaint, the co-complainant is NRDC. I mean, that's history. NRDC and the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. And we're being represented by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, if that's not that's like a powerful team that I think can make the kinds of changes that we need to get to climate justice.
There's a lot there, and maybe we could start a little bit about the legislation, and then I want to come back and go a little bit deeper on this Title VI complaint that we supported Catherine in filing yesterday. But just to spend a few more minutes, a couple of minutes on this historic legislation. One of the things that is quite incredible is the climate legislation, as most of you know, that was passed last year, also contains very significant provisions for environmental justice, over $60 billion that have been targeted towards supporting environmental justice priorities. So one of the big challenges I think we see in the coming years is how do we implement this legislation in a way that makes sure that the right money goes for the right projects in the right places at the right time? How do we make sure that we not only maximize the climate benefits, but also maximize the environmental justice benefits? We also need to think a little bit about how to stop some of the bad things in the legislation. There were compromises that needed to be made, including oil and gas drilling off the Gulf Coast. How do we actually fight some of the things that don't make sense? And then how do we, as Catherine, you were talking a little bit about Justice 40, this commitment that the administration made to help ensure that 40% of the benefits of the investments in clean energy went to vulnerable or underserved communities. So there's a big agenda. And I just wanted to, you're the co-chair, the vice co-chair of the WEJAC committee, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. You've been working on a lot of this implementation issues. What is kind of some of the advice or some of the areas you think we should be focusing on over the next couple of years?
Well, I think one place one should focus is on the states, because the money is going to the states. And all states are not created equal, as we all know. And some states will do the right thing, and some states will have to be forced to do the right thing. So I think we have to focus there, and we also have to focus on local government. I think this is an opportunity for local government to illustrate what could happen when it's done right. And I think we're seeing that here in Miami, and the type of cooperation that's taking place in this area. This is the type of cooperation that I think needs to be exported to other communities. And then lastly, technical assistance is going to be very important, because a lot of these communities that are having access to funds, that have never had access to funds before, do not have big staffs or development staffs that can write those grant applications. So this would be an opportunity to partner, especially organizations that are here at this conference that like to go back to their communities and partner with local folk to help them fill out those applications so they can get access to those funds. Some of them are going to need help on resilience and putting together the type of plans that they need to be able to survive these climate events, because they don't have the staff to do that. But there's expertise in this room that can go back and help a lot of those communities that are in need. That's where implementation, or at least where the rubber meets the road, is are we going to just let the money be allocated and the communities never have access to it, or we're going to help them get access as well as be able to put in place plans for resilience and sustainability at the same time?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. I mean, one of the real work now begins. We got the legislation passed, but unless there's actually kind of commitment and capacity of state governments, of local governments, to use that money for the right things, you could have a very uneven implementation about who does what. And this point about how to provide technical assistance support to frontline communities so they can access the money and actually take advantage of what was passed is going to be critically important in the next couple of years. And maybe that's actually a nice segue to go a little bit more now into Alabama and some of the work that you've been doing on the ground in Alabama. I'm wondering if you could just say a few more words about what the situation is in Alabama and what motivated you to want to take this complaint that we talked about just a moment ago forward.
Well, I've been working on the wastewater problem in Alabama since 2002, and what happened was that people in Lowndes County, Alabama were arrested because they could not afford on-site sanitation. And that's how I got involved. My commitment to Lowndes County, my passion for Lowndes County, is because I'm a native. I'm a country girl. That's where I grew up. So, you know, in Lowndes County, everybody is 2 first cousins once removed. So, so in order to, it's true. So, you know, if you go there, people come up to me and say, oh, they look like Catherine. Yeah, they're probably Catherine's cousin. So consequently, my commitment there is one that no matter what happens, I'll continue to work there. But the wastewater problem is still an issue, and we later found out when we did a study, when we partnered with Baylor's National School of Tropical Medicine, that there were tropical parasites there. People living with raw sewage, especially those that had failing septic systems, had hookworm. Hookworm is something that's generally associated with third world communities, communities that are not as wealthy as the United States. And I think that that was the travesty of it, and is kind of a segue to help us understand what environmental justice looks like. So we've been working on trying to solve that problem, and beyond just getting the attention of the White House and others who have supported us in putting wastewater funds in these 2 bills that we talked about to help communities like Lowndes County. We're also working on technology. We decided that we're not going to wait for somebody to create something new and different, because we know that climate change is making a lot of this old infrastructure fail. So we've actually started working with partners at NASA, at the Marshall Space Flight Center, and we're looking at ways in which we can use some of the technology that they have to improve what is being used. And one of the things that they do, they can actually take on, you know, on the International Space Station, the way they treat wastewater, they take all of the water, including urine, and they refine it to where it's better drinking water than the drinking water that comes out of our taps. So we went to them and said, look, let's work together on solving this issue. So we have NASA working with us on trying to solve an EJ issue. You know, I think that's what social justice looks like.
So in the same kind of set of issues, one is a major Title VI complaint about racial discrimination on how wastewater infrastructure is supported in Alabama, and on the other side, looking to like innovative solutions with NASA on basic sanitation challenges. I mean, that is, how brilliant is that? Look,
but I wanted to also mention that although we're using the Title VI complaint as a way to get to this action will make it equitable for everyone. Yeah. You know, at the end of the day, if one is living in a rural community, and there are Black and white people living in rural communities and on-site septic, the way the system is currently designed, no one can take advantage of the state revolving loan fund money to get on-sites, no individuals. It has to go through an entity, and the process is so convoluted and complicated. But this will change that process for everyone, because a failing septic tank doesn't care which party you're in, doesn't care what your race is. If the land doesn't perk, it doesn't perk. And this complaint is going to help everybody.
We're all in this together.
We're all in this together.
We only have 30 seconds left. A big question. You're a source of inspiration and hope to so many people in this room, around the country, around the world.
Thank you.
What gives you hope?
You know, 2 things quickly. One was my experience at Standing Rock, you know, and that's when I learned about our indigenous cultures and how we do plan for generations to come. So that's one of the things that gives me hope. All the young people that I saw at Standing Rock. Another thing that gives me hope is all these collaborations that are happening. For an example, we're working with Aspen on a conference on carbon removal. I mean, who would have thought that we would have been able to approach them and say, look, we need to talk about this because we are all in this together. And we're going to have to figure out how to reduce the carbon emissions, the legacy emissions, as well as what's happening now every day. And we're going to be, please be listening out because we convinced them to come to Alabama, to Huntsville, Alabama, and we're going to be doing an Aspen-style conference there so we can come together, develop a plan on how do we address reducing emissions, especially how do we remove carbon. So that is, those are the things that gives me hope.
Please join me, a warm round of applause to Catherine Flowers.
Thank you.
That concludes our program in the Performance Hall. Please make sure to use the hashtag AspenIdeasClimate as you post on your social media.